So this week's Torah portion is the Torah portion of Vayeshev. We continue the story of Jacob and his 12 sons and his daughter Dinah. They settled in the city of Hebron, and the story of Joseph begins. Joseph is 17 years old. He seems to be his father's favorite. He has these two dreams which seem to imply that he's going to be king over his family. His family doesn't like it, surprise, surprise. And the brothers go ahead and they do the unthinkable and they sell him as a slave. The Torah portion then kind of goes off topic and discusses Judah and his family life. He marries a woman and they have 3 children. The first 2 children die. And then he has a child with his former, he has twins with his daughter-in-law from his 2 sons who had since passed. He has twins, Peretz and Zarach. And then the Torah portion continues on with the story of Joseph going to Egypt and becoming a minister, becoming a slave to a minister, Potiphar. And then he gets thrown into the dungeon, and the Torah portion ends off with the story of the 2 ministers, the Sar Ha'ifim and Sar Hamashkim, the minister of the drinks and the minister of baking, which the commentaries explain as the minister of the agriculture minister and the minister of the economy. And he deciphers their dreams correctly. And that's how this week's Torah portion ends up. So we're not going to discuss the general story of Jacob and Joseph. We've discussed it in previous years, and we may discuss it in coming years. But this year we're going to discuss and analyze that unique story, which kind of is out of context over here, the story of Judah and Tamar, Yehuda and Tamar. And not just discuss the story itself. We're going to discuss 1 or 2 aspects of the story, but also most importantly, what is the lesson that we can take from this story that took place roughly 3,400 years ago or more, 3,600 years ago. What is the message that we can take from that story? So getting right into it, the Torah tells us that when it came to selling Joseph, the brothers were upset with him, and they decided to get rid of him. And one of the brothers said that, you know what? Let's not get rid of him entirely. Let's not kill him. Let's sell him. Whose idea was that? That was Judah's idea. And later on, when the brothers noticed how terrible their actions were, that they went ahead and they sold Joseph, they came to Judah with a complaint. And they said, Judah, you are the leader of us, of the brothers. You may not be the oldest, but you're considered the leader. And so we heeded your advice by not killing him and to go ahead and sell him. Why didn't you just tell us to return him to his home and we would have listened? Why didn't you tell us not to do anything? We would have listened to you because you're the leader. And as a result, Judah was demoted from his position of being the leader of the brothers, from family leadership. And so Judah moved away at this time from his family, and he started to make new contacts in the area. He went into business, he started a family. He starts a family, and he gets married to a woman and has 3 children. The 3 children is is the oldest, Onan being the middle child, and Shelah being the youngest son. He marries off his oldest son, to a woman named Tamar. And suddenly dies. Tamar then goes ahead and marries Er's brother, Onan. And once again, tragedy hits and Onan dies. Why did they both die? Judah was unaware, but the Torah tells us that they acted immorally, as we shall soon see, and so God removed them from this world. And so Tamar comes to Judah and says, Judah, I'd like to marry the 3rd son. Why would she like to marry the 3rd son? And she must have liked him, but there must have been, there's got to be a deeper reason. And that's what we'll see. Here's the quote from this week's Torah portion. I will pull it up on the screen. So in this week's Torah portion, the Torah portion of Vayeshev, the verse tells us as follows. And Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, named Tamar. Now Er, Judah's firstborn, was evil in the eyes of God, and God put him to death. So Judah said to Onan, come to your brother's wife and perform the rite of the levirate and raise up progeny for your brother. Now Onan knew that the progeny would not be his, and it came about when he came to his brother's wife, he wasted on the ground in order not to give seed to his brother. Now what he did was evil in the eyes of God, and he put him to death also. And from this word also, if I recall correctly, that it's from this word, but the sages explain that from the fact that the Torah associates Onan's death with Er's death, and it says put him to death also, then in that intimates that it was actually for the same reason. They both spilled seed, which is a terrible offense in Judaism. And so Er was put to death, Onan was put to death, and what happens next? What happens next is the reason why, after marrying Er and he died, Tamar married Onan, and now she wants to marry the third son. That is called the levirate marriage, as we mentioned in the verses just quoted. What is a levirate marriage? Here's a quote from the book of Deuteronomy. If brothers reside together and one of them dies having no son, the dead man's wife shall not marry an outsider. Rather, her husband's brother shall be intimate with her, making her a wife for himself, thus performing the obligation of a husband's brother with her. And it will be that the eldest brother who performs a levirate marriage, if she can bear, will succeed in the name of his deceased brother, so that the deceased brother's name, shall not be obliterated from Israel. The law in the Torah, the levirate marriage, and that is quite simple as it's put here in the verse, that if you have two brothers, Jack and Max, and they're both alive at the same time, and that's what the verse is hinting at when it says if brothers reside together. In other words, if Jack died before Max was born, then this law does not apply. And so Jack and Max are brothers, and Jack marries and passes away without any children. According to Jewish law, Max is supposed to marry his brother's widow in order to carry on his brother's name. That is called the levirate marriage, and in Hebrew it's called yibum or yevama. You see here in the Hebrew it says yevama, and the law is referred to as yibum. And so she's not allowed to marry someone else, and he's not allowed to marry someone else. Say they don't like each other and they don't want to get married, so then there is a way out. It's not a divorce, but it is to a certain degree. It's called chalitza. It's a system which is a rite which is performed by the brother and the widow, where there's a shoe involved, and one of them spits on the floor and says, or into the shoe, and she says, I do not want to, she or he, I have to refresh my memory, but one of them says, I do not, he says, I do not want to establish my brother's family, and then they can go ahead and marry whoever they'd like. This levirate marriage is not really performed nowadays for various reasons. It's a topic for a different time. In times of biblical times and Talmudic times, it was practiced, and it's still practiced today in certain Sephardic circles. In the Ashkenazic world, it isn't practiced, and chalitza is done almost automatically. It's an unfortunate situation, but it does happen occasionally. There was actually a viral clip that went around earlier this year of a chalitza ceremony taking place in the Jewish community in Iran, believe it or not. And so the reason why it went viral wasn't just because it was in Iran, but because such a ceremony is quite rare, and so it's unique, it's different. Either way, so that's why, based on this Torah law, that is why Tamar married Er, and after Er passed, that's why she went ahead and married Onan, because Onan had this responsibility to establish his brother's family. Now that Onan had died, Tamar has this responsibility to go ahead and marry the next brother, Shelah. The problem is, Judah wasn't too excited about that. Imagine, I wonder why. Here's Tamar, he doesn't know the reason why Er and Onan passed, and here's Tamar, who seemingly is the cause because she marries one brother and he dies, she marries the next brother and he dies. So Judah was not too excited. So what happens? Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, remain as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he said, lest he too die, like his brother. So Tamar went and she remained in her father's house. But guess what? Surprise, surprise, Judah never intended that Tamar marry his baby son Shelah. As Rashi explains, he dismissed her with a straw, with a lame excuse, for he did not intend to marry her to Shelah, for he said, lest he too die, i.e., this is a woman whose husbands presumably die young. And yes, it sounds a little bit outrageous that there's a woman who causes her husbands to die, but Maimonides actually issues it as a law in his book, Mishnah Torah, that if there's a woman, in Maimonides' own words, when a woman was married to two husbands and they both died, she should not marry a third man. If she did marry, she need not divorce. In other words, there is some basis to what Judah was attempting to do to ensure that she doesn't marry Shelah. But in other words, he didn't want to tell her that she is not going to ever marry Shelah, because he wanted to make sure that she'll never go ahead and marry any other man. As it says here, she should not marry a third man, not she shouldn't marry a third brother, she shouldn't marry a third man. So Judah did not want her to go ahead and marry a third man. And so he kind of brushed her off with leaving her hanging that maybe there's a chance she'll marry Shelah, hoping that she'll never marry anyone else. But here's where seemingly the story ends, but it doesn't. It goes ahead. It continues. Tamar is instructed by her father-in-law Judah to go home. So she goes home to her father's home and she waits. And she waits. And she waits. Almost like people sitting at the Passover Seder waiting for the meal. She's waiting, she's waiting, she's waiting, she's waiting. Nothing happens. And so years passed. Judah's wife passes away. And Judah gets more involved in his business dealings, and he plans a trip to the city of Timnah to oversee his sheep shearers. Some local Yenta gets news of the plan, and the Yenta goes to Shelah, goes to Tamar and says, Tamar, your father-in-law, remember the guy who told you that when Shelah gets older, he's going to marry him to you? You know what? He got older. And guess what? Judah, the father-in-law, is traveling to Timnah. So Tamar is desperate to have children, not just any children, but children from the Abrahamic family, from Judah specifically, but in general from the Abrahamic family. And she figures, you know what? If it's not going to happen through Er, and it's not going to happen through Onan, and it's not going to happen through Shelah, here's my chance. Maybe it'll happen through Judah. So what does she do? She does as follows. The verse continues. Many days passed, and Shua's daughter, that was the name of Judah's father-in-law. Don't get confused, a lot of names. Judah's father-in-law, his name was Shua, and Shua's daughter, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was consoled. He went up to watch over his sheep shears, he and Hira, his Adulamite friend, to Timnah, the city of Timnah. They travel up to the city of Timnah. And it was told to Tamar, saying, behold, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she took off her widow's garb, covered her head with a veil, and covered her face, and she sat down at the crossroads that were on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, but as for her, she was not given to him for a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot. He had no idea her face was covered. He had no idea this was Tamar, because she covered her face. So he turned aside toward her to the road, and he said, get ready now, I will come to you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give me that you should come to me? What are you going to give me in payment for this? And he said, I will send a kid goat from the herd. And she said, only if you give me a pledge until you send it. So he said, what is the pledge that I should give you? And she said, your signet ring, your cloak, and the staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her, and he came to her, and she conceived his likeness. Then she arose and went away, and she took off her veil, and she donned her widow's garb. So Tamar was successful. She wanted to have children from the Abrahamic family. Didn't happen through Er, didn't happen through Onan. She felt swindled out of marrying Shelah. And here she succeeded in conceiving with Judah. Judah has no idea what has happened. And actually, it's important to note that at this point, such relationships were actually permitted according to Torah law. It was only obviously consensual relationships was permitted according to Torah. It was only once there was the giving of the Torah that such a relationship would have been prohibited. And so inherently, Judah did nothing wrong from the legal point of view. And so the story continues. Judah has no idea what has happened, but Tamar is expecting. The drama is just the beginning, because what happens next gets a little bit out of hand, if you will. What happens? As you recall, Judah said he was going to send the kid goat. So he arrives at Timnah, he arrives by his sheep, and he sends a kid goat by the hand of a Zadulamite friend to take the pledge from the woman's hand, but he did not find her. Chira comes to the crossroads and he's looking for her, and she's gone. So he asked the people of the place, saying, "Where is the harlot who was at the crossroads on the way?" And they said, "No harlot was here." So he returned to Judah and he said, "I have not found her." And not only that, the people of the place also said, "No harlot was here." So Judah said, "Let her take them for herself, lest we become a laughingstock. Behold, I sent this kid, but you did not find her." In other words, Judah was a little bit concerned. It may have been legit legally, but it doesn't smell right, and it's embarrassing. So he says, if we're going to go ahead and we're going to start asking, and we're going to start asking around, it's not going to be good for us. We tried our best. I sent you with the kid goat. You didn't find her. All right, let her take what he had. Now it came about after nearly 3 months, and was told to Judah, saying, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot, and behold, she is pregnant from harlotry." So Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burnt." Why burnt? Because according to Jewish law, Tamar wasn't just any woman. Tamar was actually from the priestly family. She was a descendant of Shem. If you recall, Shem what is referred to as a Kohen. And according to Jewish law at the time, if a Kohen, it's a Judah who was permitted to do what he did, but Tamar was not necessarily permitted. And so Judah finds out that Tamar was a harlot, and he says, according to the law of the land at that time, Tamar should be sentenced to death. She should be burned. She was taken out, and she sent word to her father-in-law, saying, "From the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant." She sent the 3 items, and she said, "Please recognize whose signet ring, cloak, and staff are these." Then Judah recognized them, and he said, "She is right. It is from me, because I did not give her to my son Shelah." But he no longer continued to be intimate with her. It's interesting to note this final verse, "and he no longer continued to be intimate with her." Rashi actually, the verse isn't perfectly clear on what the word means. If I recall correctly, on this verse, Rashi says, let me just pull it up quickly to ensure that I'm recalling correctly. But if it's on this verse, Rashi says that it can be read both ways. Either he no longer continued to be intimate with her, or he did continue to be intimate with her. They got married. But I'm just going to find that Rashi quickly to ensure that I'm not confusing it with another verse that uses that same term. Yeah. So Rashi says he no longer continued. Some say, Rashi quotes from the Talmud or the Midrash, some say he did not continue to know her, and others say he did not seize. A similar instance is found in connection with Eldad and Medad, where the verse reads, "V'lo yasvu," they did not continue, which the Targum renders, they did not cease. So "v'lo yasaf" over here could mean he did not continue, or he did not cease to be intimate with her. In other words, he married her. And so as soon as Yehuda comes forward, so what happens here? It's that moment of uncertainty. It's that moment of fear. She's being brought out to be burnt, and she says, look, she doesn't say it's from Judah, and so it's not a literal harlot. There's a story behind it. She says she sends it to Judah privately and says, please recognize whose this are. And she left it up to Judah. And we're going to focus on that a little bit more. Either way, Tamar is saved from execution. And not only that, she merits to give birth to two children, twins, Peretz and Zarach. Peretz and Zarach turn out to be, Peretz turns out to be the progenitor to King David, King David's great-great-grandfather. So from this union of Tamar and Judah comes the Davidic line. And obviously from the Davidic line comes Mashiach. So we're going to analyze this story. Not all of it, because as I'm sure you have many, many questions, and if there are questions that are not raised in today's class and you do have those questions, please email them to me or post them in the chat box, and we'll see if we have time to get to them at the end of the class. So we're not going to focus on all the questions that there are in all aspects that should be discussed. We're going to focus on one aspect of the story. But before we do get into that final aspect that we're going to analyze, almost in Talmudic fashion, we're going to veer off almost into a side point, which is derived from this unique point that we're going to analyze. That all sounded gibberish, but here it goes. The aspect that we're going to analyze is that unique verse from that Yenta. If you recall, there was that Yenta. Who was the Yenta? The Yenta, they asked the Yenta, and the Yenta said, behold, your father-in-law, Judah, went up to Timnah. He went up, he traveled upward. In other words, he had to go up a mountain to get to Timnah. That's what the Yenta tells Tamar. The person that the townsfolk tells Tamar. Why is that important? In other words, it's a small detail, but you know what? This is Torah. Every single word is precise and concise, and therefore purpose. What does it teach us that he went up to Timnah? He went to Timnah. Why is it? And he went up to Timnah. In other words, granted, technically that's what happened. He went up to Timnah, but it also doesn't tell us how he traveled there. Did he go by horse? Did he go by camel? It also doesn't tell us what type of food he took along the way or what direction he was traveling, north, east, south, or west. So the Torah doesn't tell us all the details. It's not just a nice storybook trying to give us the atmosphere and the frame of mind of what's going on. Every detail is important. So why is this detail so important? And even more than that, it's perplexing. He went up to Timnah. Tamar is told that her father-in-law Judah went up to Timnah. But hold it. Timnah is not this city we've never heard of. Later on, a number of generations later, in the book of Judges, we have the famous Samson. Samson and Delilah. I'm sure you're familiar with Samson, who ruled the Jewish people for many, many years and succeeded in saving them from the Philistines. Samson the Mighty. He's associated with Timnah as well. But let's see what it says about him and Timnah. And Samson went down to Timnah, and he saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came up and he told his father and mother and said, I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughter of the Philistines, so now take her to me for a wife. And his father and mother said to him, is there no woman among the daughters of your brothers and among all my people that you go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? Samson said to his father, take her for me because she is pleasing in my eyes. Did you spot that contradiction? Nice story about Samson. This is actually referring to Delilah. But the first verse, Samson went down to Timnah. Hold on. Was Timnah on the bottom of the mountain and so Samson had to go down? Or was Timnah on the top of the mountain so Judah had to go up? Can't you make up your mind? It's the same city, Timnah. Was it on the top of the mountain? Was it on the bottom of the mountain? And who cares? Is it that important that we should discuss it? It is. And you know what? The Talmud discusses it. And the Talmud discusses it at such length that there are actually 3 answers that the Talmud gives to this seemingly insignificant question, which teaches us that it is quite the significant question. So where is Timnah? Is it on the top, on the bottom? Or is it a little confused? Here's the quote from the Talmud. The verse states, and Samson went down to Timnah, but a different verse states, behold, your father-in-law, our verse, is going up to Timnah. So which one is it? Rabbi Elazar said, answer number one, in the case of Samson, who was disgraced there, the verse speaks of a descent. In the case of Judah, who became spiritually uplifted there, the verse speaks of an ascent. In other words, the Talmud Rabbi Elazar is explaining that here it's not talking about a physical going up or going down as in on a mountain. It's a spiritual ascent or descent. And so when it's talking about Samson in the book of Judges, we're over here, Samson goes ahead and marries Delilah, and that was the beginning of his end, the beginning of his downfall. It's referred to as he went down to Timnah because Samson, went down at this point spiritually. But when we're talking about Judah, who on the outside, it seems like it's not such a great story, but really there's depth to it. And it's specifically here where Judah gives birth to, where it's set in motion that Judah fathers Peretz, Zerach and Peretz, and through that the Davidic line, and through that Moshiach, who will lead the Jewish people out of exile. He had a spiritual ascent. And so that's why over here it says, and Judah went up to Timnah. That's the first answer. It's a spiritual ascent and descent. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani said there were two places called Timnah. One was reached by traveling downward, and the other by traveling upward. Classic answer. Two different Timnahs. Yeah, Portland, Washington, Portland, Maine. As a kid, Portland, Washington, and Portland, Maine had both very prominent place in our upbringing because my father has a very close friend. One of his best friends is the Chabad rabbi in Portland, Maine. And my father, as a yeshiva student, was actually a Chabad rabbi in Portland, Oregon. And so, he was in Seattle, Washington, and spent considerable amount of time in Portland, Oregon, which is why I called it Portland, Washington. Either way, so that's the two Portlands. And as a kid, it was quite confusing. So here we have Timnah as well. There were two Timnahs in town. One was, I don't know where, to the east, to the west, and the other one was the other direction. One was on top of the mountain, one was on the bottom of the mountain. Answers this contradiction. Here's the third answer. Rav Papa said, that was his name, Rav Papa said, there was only one place called Timnah, and it was located on a mountain slope. Coming from one direction, one had to travel downward. Coming from the other direction, one had to travel upward. And he names three names of cities in Babylon, which everyone in that study hall was familiar with, that were similar cities. They were in the middle of a mountain, on a mountain slope, like Verdonia, Beibari, and the market of Neresh. They're great answers. But second two are technical answers. The first one is a spiritual twist, but the question is, why is this considered a spiritual ascent for Shimshon? And so we touched upon it by going through the three answers. But we're going to dwell a little bit deeper in these two aspects, in the first answer, and then we're going to skip to the third answer and the most powerful lesson, if you will, from this aspect of the story. Here's the first lesson that we can take. That gives us the first inkling that it was a spiritual ascent for Judah. It was a moment in time that here we are, thousands of years later, still analyzing this aspect of the story. A quote from the Talmud tractate Sota. The Talmud reads as follows. The verse states, she sent word to her father-in-law saying, from the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. The Talmud asks the obvious question. She's being brought out to the stake to be burnt, or however they burnt her, or however they burnt offenders at the time. She could have saved her life simply, as the Talmud says, but let her simply tell them explicitly that she is carrying his child. Hello, Judah, how are you? It's your child. It's not from anyone. I'm not a harlot. This is your child. You remember that time at the crossroads, there was a harlot that suddenly disappeared? That was me. Why don't you do that? What is she sending you three things? And Judah, do you recognize that? Why is she putting it in his hands? He could have easily said, I have no idea, and she would have lost her life. Rav Zutya bar Tuvia said in the name of Rav. And some say Rav Chana bar Bizna said in the name of Rabbi Shimon Chasida. And some say Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Ben Yochai. It is better for a person to cast himself into a fiery furnace than to embarrass another person in public. From where do we learn this? From Tamar. We'll get to Judah in a moment, but think about Tamar. She could have easily gotten out of this one, and she decided not to. Why not? She did not want to embarrass Judah, and Judah deserved to be embarrassed. This was Judah's doing, every single step of it. But Tamar went so far to put her life on the line and in Judah's hands, as long as she won't have to embarrass someone publicly. And the Talmud puts tremendous stress on this, how important and how careful one has to be not to embarrass someone else publicly, even if they're deserving of it. And we learn it from Tamar, of how careful one has to be. And Judah is also uniquely highlighted here in the Talmud. Because Judah, being of the status that he was, Jacob's son, the leader of the family, yes, he was demoted, but he was still seen as someone special, as we'll see in later Torah portions. Judah's the greatest tribe from the tribes. Mashiach comes from him, King David came from him. The Davidic line comes from Judah. He could have easily disappeared. No, I don't recognize you these. But he humbly accepted responsibility out in the open. And he said, it's from me. He didn't hesitate, make any phone calls. He didn't think, let me grapple with it for a few days. Immediately he said, it's from me. And not only that, he inspired others. As the Talmud relates, that there was an episode with Reuven, his brother, the oldest brother, that he was embarrassed, but he decided to admit his wrongdoing because he was inspired by Judah. Judah admitted his deed with Tamar and was not embarrassed to do so. What became of him? He inherited the life of the world to come. Reuben admitted his sin in interfering with his father's marital life and was not embarrassed. Now, who caused Reuben to admit his error? It was Judah. Judah inspired Reuben to admit his error. So in other words, in this context of these two lessons that the Talmud points out, we could say that there was positivity that came from the story, even according to this view. In other words, to understand the question that we asked, why isn't it a contradiction between going up and going down? The Talmud gave that first answer that it was a spiritual ascent for Judah and a spiritual descent for Samson, and therefore it's referred to as Judah went up and Samson went down. This explains a little bit of how he was a spiritual ascent. But there's one more important point. And that is, the mystics point out that there was something greater at play here. And that was, the ultimate purpose of creation is the redemption. The revelation of Mashiach, may it come speedily in our days. Amen. That is the ultimate purpose of creation. And that is, as we explained many, many classes, that's our mission in this world. Our day-to-day mission in our lives is to reveal the God spark within everything, thereby revealing the greater godly spark, which will be revealed in a literal sense, and we'll all be able to see it with the coming of Mashiach, when the world will be a godly world, a world where everything will be perfect. And so the evil inclination and Satan are out to stop Mashiach from coming about. They don't want him to come. Satan would rather Mashiach never comes, because then there'll always be evil in the world. And so Satan did everything in his power to stop King David from being born and to stop Mashiach from being born. And that's why, in order for King David to be born, it had to go through these untraditional, unorthodox ways for those children to be born. Which is why Judah specifically had to have children with Tamar in this roundabout, backward alleyway in order to, so to speak, go behind the back of Satan. Because as we see straight up, for Tamar to marry Er, that didn't yield children. For Tamar to marry Onam, that didn't yield children. There was something deeper at play here. There was the evil forces trying to stop those children from being born. That union between Tamar and Judah. Which is why later, a number of generations later, who is the next backward story, so to speak, where there's children that ultimately led to King David's birth? Ruth, famous convert. Ruth was the mother, the grandmother of Mashiach. Who was Ruth? Ruth was a granddaughter of Balak, the evil king who wanted to eradicate the Jewish people. And so came Ruth, and who did she marry? Boaz. But it didn't happen so simply. For those who've read the book of Ruth, came also in a roundabout way. But from that union came a son who had a son who had another son whose name was King David. And so every step of the way, it had to be this backwards way because there was something much greater at play. And so that's why this whole story of Judah was really that deeper meaning, that ascent for Judah to father those children, which will ultimately father King David, who will ultimately be the progenitor of King Mashiach. But now we're going to move back to the story of Timnah, to the city of Timnah. When talking about the story of Timnah, the city of Timnah, granted, this is a great answer to explain their spiritual ascent or descent, but you know what? Who are we talking about? Who said this statement that your father-in-law went up to Timnah? The Yenta of town, that gossiper of town. That gossiper of town couldn't have possibly known that Judah will have an ascent from this story, and so he called it, he's going up to Timnah. When he was talking to Tamar, he was talking very, very practical. Tamar, you want to meet your father-in-law? He's going up to Timnah. He's not coming down from the top of the mountain. He's going up from the bottom of the mountain. In other words, he had to give, it has to be something practical in the simple narrative of the story of the Torah portion, where it fits in to say he was going up to Timnah. As the Rebbe says, our verse's statement, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah, is spoken in the second person. In other words, these were merely the words spoken to Tamar by one of the local townspeople. Surely, when he told Tamar that Judah was going up to Timnah, that individual couldn't have been referring to Judah's future spiritual advancement, for he wouldn't have known about it. If so, the question in our verse remains, why does the individual state that Judah went up to Timnah? And so the simple answer is the third answer from the Talmud. And how do we know that? Because Rashi quotes it. Rashi, our favorite commentary, the foremost commentary on the Torah, in his introduction, in one of the introductory verses of the Torah, in one of his commentaries on the first verses, on the early verses on the Torah, Rashi mentions that his commentary is that even a 5-year-old should be able to understand. In other words, he will give commentary that is the most simple and straightforward commentary on the Torah. And so here you have the Talmudic passage, which gets into micro-analysis on this word of Timnah going up. What does it mean? And it gives 3 answers. But Rashi says, you know what's the most simple, straightforward answer? The third one. What was the third one? Just to recap, here's a quote from Rashi. Is going up to Timnah. When it comes to Samson, however, the verse states, and Samson went down to Timnah. The apparent contradiction can be resolved as follows. Timnah was situated on a mountain slope, so they would go up to it from here and go down to it from there. This explains why the guy would tell Tamar, your father-in-law went up, because she's trying to meet Judah. And if he just tells her he went to Timnah, he could have gone from the top of the mountain down to Timnah, or he could have gone from the bottom of the mountain up to Timnah. And guess what? They would have never crossed paths, and this whole story would have never happened, and King David would have never been born. He didn't know about the King David part about it. He didn't know about the children part of it. He just knew that Tamar wants to find her father-in-law. So he had to give exact directions where she can find him. So he gave very, very simple directions. You want to find your father-in-law, he went up to Timnah. That's the direction he took. That's the road he took. And that's where you're going to find him. Go sit at the crossroads, which is following that path that goes up the mountain to Timnah. Simple, straightforward. But why is this important to us in 2020? Why is this important to us so many thousands of years later? It's important to us because this story and this aspect of Timnah being in the middle of the mountain can also be referring and alluding to a different mountain. Which mountain? The mountain of our service to God. Our service of God, our divine service, day in, day out, our Judaism, our commitments, is referred to in the verse in Psalms as a mountain. Who will ascend upon God's mount, and who will stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not taken my name in vain, and has not sworn deceitfully. You see, everything in life is like climbing up a mountain. Just like a mountain, when you're riding up the mountain, and you're on a steep incline, you can't stop. You gotta continuously go, because it's either up or down. There's no stagnation. You're on a steep incline. You got to be on the move. It's either moving up or moving down. Just like the mountain which Timnah was on, it's either you're coming down to Timnah or you're going up to Timnah. And so the verse is alluding to this concept that our service to God is like a mountain. How is that in our service in God? For example, when we're a child, when we're younger, we have different dreams. We have certain dreams, childish dreams, if you will. And as we get older, we shed those childish dreams, those childish paradigms, and we move on to a broader vision, a deeper vision, greater dreams that we may have, to understand that giving is more important than taking, to understand that study is not so boring. As Mark Twain once said, that when I was a youngster, I forget how old he says, but when I was 16, I couldn't imagine how stupid my parents were. And then when I turned 22, I couldn't believe how much my parents have learned in such a few years. And so we move along in that mountain of life as life goes along, or we should hope so. Spiritually, it's the same idea. We have those mountains as well. We have those mountains in life where we start off on the bottom, and we started putting on tefillin once a week. We started lighting Shabbos candles once a month, or maybe even once a year. We start studying Torah once in a while. We study Torah, and then we start climbing up that mountain. Growth. Growth is important in whatever we do, be it spiritual items or be it materialistic items. It's always important to grow. Professionals always want to improve their skills. Businessmen always want that the following quarter should be much greater success than the previous quarter, right? A company that has the same amount of profits every single quarter is not seen as a successful company. The profits got to grow every year. And so in Judaism, we also have that need for growth. In Judaism, we have that need for growth. If we give so much for charity this year, next year, we got to step it up a bit. If we study Torah at a certain degree, next year or next week, next month, we got to step up our Torah study, something deeper, something broader. More time spent on Torah study. When it comes to doing Shabbos, when it comes to hosting guests for Shabbos. Well, we never hosted guests for Shabbos, or we had one or two guests. This year, let's take it up a notch. It's a little tough with COVID, but same idea. But what's the message? The message that Timnah teaches us is that life is on a mountain. And the mountain is this incline. And we got to constantly be on the move because it's either up or down. There's no stagnation. There's nowhere in the middle. If you stop moving, you go backwards. There's no stopping to move. It's either up or down. Religious experience, says the Rebbe, is likened to climbing a mountain. We know that when climbing a mountain, one cannot stop in the middle of the incline. Doing so would almost certainly cause him to slip and fall. Instead, one must continue climbing without stopping. Same is true of climbing the mountain of God. One must constantly continue upward, not just to reach higher, but also to avoid falling. In other words, one mustn't suffice with his current spiritual achievements, because staying put without climbing higher would result in a spiritual decline. This is the message that Timnah is teaching us, that the Torah is teaching us by focusing on this aspect. When we're climbing up that mountain of life, be it in our life in general or religious experience in particular, we can't say, you know what, where I am is good, I'm good. I get that all the time. Rabbi, I'm good. You're great, you're wonderful. But life is like a mountain. It's either up or down, there's no middle. If you stop, it's not that you're staying status quo, it's that you start going backwards. And we can't afford that. We got to constantly grow, we got to constantly be on the move, we got to constantly be going up. Because if we're not going up, we're going down. The verse states, in Shema we say, it's talking about being committed in belief in God, and it says, V'sartem, and you will deviate, va'avadetem elokim achem, and you will serve idols, other gods. And the commentary said, what do you mean? If you deviate from the path, maybe you're just deviating, you're staying down a flat path, you're not going backwards. You're just not doing good, you're staying neutral. The mystics say, The verse is telling us immediately, if we stay neutral, we're going to go backwards and we're going to start serving idol worship. Idol worship in many different forms. It doesn't mean literal idol worship, it means deviating from the path of God. So in other words, we always have to remember we got to be constantly going up this mountain, because if we're not going up, we're going down. And Hanukkah, which is going to be Thursday night, teaches us that important lesson in a very tangible manner. How does it teach us that? Right, like the treadmill. The treadmill is a perfect metaphor. Life is not walking around the block, where if you stop, you walk, you had a nice walk. Life is like a treadmill. If the treadmill is going fast, that conveyor belt is moving. If you stop moving, you don't always stop. You don't only stop, you go flying backwards, and it ain't a pretty sight. We all know, we've all been there. I think I've been there. You stop, you try a trick, you try to see what happens if you move backwards, or you try to see what happens, see if you can stay on until the end, whatever it is, it doesn't end well. But why? I'm just stopping, I'm not going backwards. If you stop, you go backwards. Hanukkah teaches us that. As the Talmud says, the Talmud teaches us about the laws of Hanukkah. This is how the Talmud explains it. Our rabbis taught in a Braita, quote from the Talmud in Tractate Shabbos, the basic Hanukkah mitzvah is fulfilled by lighting one candle per household. Yeah, almost like a yahrzeit candle, if you will. One candle. Right? We don't do that. What do? Where does it come from that we light a menorah of 8 candles? The following. A more preferred way is for each member of the household to light 1 candle each night. As for the most preferred way, Beit Shammai holds, the study house of Shammai was of the opinion that it is to light 8 candles on the first night and subtract 1 each night. Beis Hillel holds that it is to light 1 candle on the first night and to add 1 each night thereafter, exactly as we do it. Beis Shammai holds that the number of candles ought to correspond to the number of bulls brought each day as sacrifices of Sukkot, which decreases with each successive day. Beis Hillel holds that we must always advance upward in matters of holiness, not downward. And so what do we have? The obligation to light Hanukkah candles is just that, light Hanukkah candles. How do we fulfill this mitzvah? And so the Talmud tells us that you can fulfill it by just having 1 candle lit each night of Hanukkah in every home. Or you can have it that each person in every home lights 1 candle every night. Or you can have it that every night you light a different number of candles. This is the most preferred way. How do you light those 8 candles? It's a subject of debate between Beit Shammai and Beis Hillel. And we follow the opinion of Beis Hillel that on the first night we light 1, and the second night we light 2, culminating on the 8th night we light 8 candles for the 8 nights of Hanukkah. Now that most preferred way, do we do it that each person lights 8 or only one person in each home? That's various customs, and the Talmud is not clear with that. And so some have the custom that only one menorah is lit in the home. Some have the custom that everyone lights a menorah in the home. And you can do it however you'd like. But let's get back to the reasons. What is the reason that Beis Hillel says that on the first night we light 1, the second night we light 2, the third night we light 3? That is the most preferred way, and that's the actual opinion that we follow. Because what in holiness Hillel says, we must always advance upward, not downward. So in other words, if night number 1 I light 1, night number 2 I have to light 2, night number 3 I have to light 3. But there's a surprising twist, and that is, what happens if night number 1 I light 1, number 2 I light 2, night number 3 I light 3? Now comes night number 4, and I decide, you know what? I'm only going to light 3. It's night number 4, but I'm only going to light 3 candles. Stagnant. You know what? I was doing the most preferred way. Now I'm just going to continue status quo, lighting just 3 candles. Not only are you not staying status, not only are you not advancing forward, but you're actually going backward. Because by lighting 3 candles on the 4th night, you're descending from the most preferred way to the middle way. You're going backwards. Just as this concept that we studied about this mountain, you got to be constantly on the move, because if you're not going forward, you're going backward. On the 4th night of Hanukkah, if you don't go forward and light that 4th candle, and you just light 3 candles, you're not staying the same as you were last night lighting 3 candles. You're going backward because now you're not lighting the most preferred way anymore. So you're going downward. Automatically, there is no way of staying status quo. Status quo is moving forward, moving upward. Growth, that is status quo. Because if you're not moving upward, you're not moving anywhere. And you're moving backward. And so we add a candle each night because we always have to advance upward. And if we miss a night of adding a candle, we're decreasing automatically. If one failed to add a candle on the 2nd night, he hasn't advanced upward from where he stood on the previous night. But that's not all. By failing to add an additional candle, he's no longer fulfilled the mitzvah in the most preferred way. He has, in fact, accomplished less than he did the previous night when he did observe it in the most preferred way. If one wishes to continue observing the mitzvah at the same level of quality as the night before, he must increase in holiness. In other words, to be status quo, you got to increase in holiness. To keep up with the achievements of yesterday, it's not good enough to do the achievement of yesterday. You have to have a new achievement. It was a phrase that was so yesterday, that was so last year, that was so the 90s, right? Now that was so 5 minutes ago. Because we got to be constantly on the move. Life's a mountain. It's either we're going up or we're going down. And so whatever we're doing in life, we always have to ask ourselves, not what have I accomplished, but more, how have I grown? How am I going to do more today than I did yesterday? How am I going to do more this year than I did last year? And whatever it may be, Torah study, charity, tefillin, lighting Shabbos candles, our relationships, our family, in life in general, our purpose in life, we always have to ask, how am I growing today? Because you know what? Life's a treadmill. If we stop, we go backwards. We got to constantly be on the move. I'd like to end off with a story. There's a famous Hasidic sage, Rabbi Meir from Islam. And in his city, in his town, there was a mikvah, a ritual bath, that he would go to every morning, and many Jews would go to every morning. And in the winter, it would get very icy. But the problem was the ritual bath was you had to pass a mountain, or it was on the top of the mountain. Either way, there was a mountain somewhere connected to traveling to the ritual bath. And people would go, and they'd slip and slide their way, and it would be very tough for them to reach that ritual bath, which was by the mountain, because they'd slide all the way down the mountain. Suddenly, they watch a Meir from Ishlaner, this holy sage, and he's walking. He's not slipping, he's not sliding, he's constantly walking up that mountain without slipping, without any obstacles whatsoever. He goes to the ritual bath, and he comes back out and comes back down, and everyone's in awe. And they turn to him for an explanation. He explains says in Yiddish, as means zugebunden eben fällt man nicht unter. If you're connected above, you can't fall below. If you're climbing up that mountain and you're connected with a harness to the top of the mountain, you're not going to fall. In other words, in this travel of life, in this going up the mountain, we have to constantly be on the move, and especially always be on the move connected to the Almighty. And so we should analyze this, and an idea would be to see one area in our life, one area in our commitment to Judaism, and say, where can I have growth? It doesn't have to be something tremendous. It doesn't have to be something outlandish. It can be something small. I've been putting on tefillin once a week or once a month until now. I'll start putting it on twice a month. I've been lighting Shabbos candles and not being careful to light it before sunset. Start lighting it before sunset. It's a 5-minute difference. Something small like that. Charity, I give, I don't know, $1,800 a year to charity. I'll give $1,900 this year because I'm going to grow. Shabbos, Hanukkah candles. Every year, I didn't make it through the year lighting all night. This year, I'll make it through lighting all night at the appropriate time. Whatever it may be, let's do it, let's grow, and let's make sure that today is bigger. We grew, and we've done better than yesterday. And then tomorrow, what we did the day before was so yesterday. We gotta move on. Thank you all for joining.